Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. Loads and loads of love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing incredibly well, and don't forget to go and get that lovely hot cup of cocoa or whatever it is that you drink, coffee or tea, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight, sending each and every one of you loads and loads of love. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I'm writing you this letter in German, as although I can speak English fluently, my written English is not eloquent, so I do hope you can get a translator to translate my German for you back into English. It was only recently that upon doing my research of the critter known as Bigfoot, that I finally realised what it was that I'd encountered in the summer of 1985 in Alberta, Canada, all those years ago. In Germany, we're not well acquainted with the Bigfoot phenomenon, and I have no knowledge whether such a critter actually exists in our part of the world or not. If they do exist here, I'm not aware of any reported sightings, and if there were physical sightings here, I'm almost certain people would possibly not want to talk about them for fear of ridicule. My name is Zelda, and I'm from Frankfurt in Germany, known for its futuristic skyline and its busy German airport. The city is located on the River Main and is a condensed, thriving metropolis that would possibly feel much like a village to those of you who live in New York. We are home to the famous Frankfurter sausage that is always served with lashings of mustard here in Germany. My story begins when I was working as a young nanny in my early 20s for the wealthy, affluent Fisher family living in the West End, which is equivalent to London's Mayfair or New York's Tribeca district. The Fishers would spend much of their time travelling, as they were an adventurous couple that adored exploring the world, but they were eager to take their children along for the ride as part of their adventure. This invariably meant they required a nanny full-time to take care of the children, while they sauntered out to restaurants, painted the town red, or decided to go skiing for a few days without the kids. I've always loved children, and with the added perk of jetting to other countries around the world and being paid well in the process, it was not a job to be sneezed at by any manner of means, especially back then when overseas travel was far less common and much less accessible than it is today. On a personal level, I could never have afforded to tour so many exciting places, and so working for the Fishers meant I frequented places that were often only visited by the most affluent members of society at the time. So as you can imagine, while the children were young, I journeyed to many parts of the world with the Fisher family. But two stories stand out in all my adventures that border on the bizarre and outlandish, and these are the stories I'm privileged to share with you today. On one occasion we were booked into a fancy, prestigious, opulent hotel in the heart of the English countryside. I so wish I could remember the name of the place, but it was such a long time ago. I do know that it had the quintessential, formidable reputation for being haunted, as many former guests of the hotel had reported hearing disembodied voices, seeing apparitions and hearing strange laughter, all of which was terribly appealing to the Fishers, as they were the kind of people that just wanted to experience anything and everything. They believed that based on England's vibrant, rich history, staying in a haunted hotel was a terribly exciting prospect. "How do you feel about staying in a haunted hotel for a couple of nights, Zelda?" Millie, my boss, asked me. "It doesn't bother you, does it?" "Of course not," I assured Millie. "It doesn't worry me in the slightest. I don't believe in the paranormal anyway." "That's the spirit," chuckled Millie. "I love how grounded you are, Zelda. Nothing unsettles or unnerves you. I, on the other hand, would be so terrified to see a ghost, but I have to and I want to see one at the very same time, if that makes any sense to you at all." "What does haunted mean, Mummy?" asked Stephen. Millie ruffled her son's hair affectionately with her long fingers. "It just means the hotel we're staying in has a long dynamic history. It's an old building, that's all," she said, giving me a big knowing wink. Before long, we settled into this grand historic hotel that was a stunning example of 18th century Queen Anne architecture, and at one time it had been a family mansion. I'd never been an expert of the paranormal before, but I will say this about the hotel. I did sense an outer-worldly energy about this intriguing, curious place, because as you walk down the long corridors past the various hotel suites, you really sense something was watching you, which even for my pragmatic, very unruffled temperament was slightly discomposing and unsettling. I remember it was surrounded by ubiquitous rolling green turf, geometrical garden designs and beds filled with exquisite English roses. When we booked into the hotel, Millie made a comment to the porter about the so-called paranormal activity reputed to be at the hotel, and made no secret of the fact that we had chosen to stay at this particular hotel in the very hope that we might actually get to spot a ghost. "Have you seen any sightings of the ghost?" she asked in her strong German accent. "I've seen one of the ghosts here, madam," he announced. "A couple of times, actually." He bowed his head and exited the room. He most certainly was not forthcoming, and appeared exceedingly cagey. "That's a bummer," sighed Millie. "If he works here and has only ever seen a ghost on a couple of occasions, what are our chances, I ask you?" That evening, after we retired to bed, I'd been placed in my own suite, which was a lavish hotel room with luxurious designer covers swathing the queen-size bed and large windows overlooking a pretty courtyard. For a long while I read a book, and then I lay down, and before long I had drifted off into a deep sleep. At one stage during the night, I was certain I could hear ethereal music coming from the courtyard, voices and clinking of glasses, almost as if people were having a celebratory party. When I opened the window in my room, everything stopped and became incredibly quiet. It really sent chills down my spine, because the moment I closed the window, the partying seemed to start all over again. If that's not enough weirdness for you, I woke up during the night when I heard an urgent, sharp tapping on my door. It was Stefan standing in the doorway of my bedroom suite. He was trembling and shaking, and his eyes were as wide as saucers. I've never seen the boy look so discomposed and fearful in my entire life. "What on earth is the matter with you?" I asked him, taking him into my arms to comfort him. "You're as white as a sheet. Are you all right?" "I'm frightened," he told me. "A strange woman dressed all funny keeps coming into the room and sits on the bed and stares at me." "You've probably just had a nightmare," I told him. "Dreams like that can sometimes feel very real." "Please will you stay in our bedroom with us?" he begged. "There's another bed in our room. You can sleep there." "All right," I said, putting my arms around Stefan. "If it makes you feel better, I'll sleep in the other bed." I hastily put on my dressing gown and followed him to their bedroom suite, which he shared with his brother Gunther. "Did you wake Gunther when you got scared?" I asked. "I tried to," he said, "but he's dead to the world and just moaned at me when I tried to shake him. He gets very grumpy if you try to wake him up." As I entered Stefan's bedroom suite, I noted at the end of his bed there appeared to be a deep indentation, almost as if someone had been sitting there, and if that wasn't idiosyncratic and freakish enough, there was a strong floral bouquet, very much like violets. That kind of a scent was permeating the entire room, which I thought was decidedly odd. I could see that Gunther was fast asleep and snoring loudly. I climbed into the spare bed and glanced up at Stefan. "Wake me up if you get scared at all. You can call out my name and I'll hear you," I told him. I could tell Stefan was heartily relieved to have me in the bedroom with him. Before long I began to drift off into a deep sleep, and then I was awoken to hear Stefan's voice saying, "Zelda, the woman is coming back. It's getting cold in here. It always gets cold when she comes, and the smell of violets gets very strong." I opened my eyes surreptitiously and could feel these blasts of freezing cold, icy air entering the room, along with the lingering, powerful scent of violet. The only way I can describe it to you is that the room we were sleeping in had become like an icebox. I started to shiver with cold as I was absolutely frozen, and that was when I saw her. I sat up in astonishment, hardly daring to believe what I was discerning, and I was so befuddled that I just stared at this woman. I discerned the woman very clearly, although she seemed slightly blurred and hazy, rather like a photograph that is slightly out of focus. I noticed the details of the blue low-neck gown that she was wearing, that was worn over a pretty petticoat, with the dress open at the front, showing the rest of the petticoat, and I knew that this was a style of clothing from the 1800s. The woman had a young Liz Taylor look about her, with the quintessential dark hair and porcelain-white skin, and was sitting at the end of Stefan's bed, just staring at him with adoring, devoted eyes, and Stefan was staring back at her in absolute terror. I'd never seen him look that afraid. "Excuse me, madam," I said in English. "Do you mind leaving? The boy's trying to get some sleep. He's very tired and would appreciate not being disturbed." The woman's face swiveled around in my direction, and I could feel her eyes fix on me with an angry, hostile glare. And then she just glided out of the room, looking directly at me as she left with eyes like daggers, and if looks could kill, I would almost certainly be dead. I could hear her skirt sweeping across the floor, and she walked right through the closed door and vanished completely from our sight. Stefan was in tears, and I had to console him. "Why was the funny woman staring at me like that?" he cried. "I don't know," I said. As soon as the woman left the room, the coldness receded, and the strong smell of violets eventually faded. I'm relieved to say that she never ever came back again during that night. The following morning I spoke to the concierge and told him about the strange apparition that I'd witnessed during the night, and gave him a detailed description of the woman. "I think you've seen one of our resident ghosts," he informed me. "The lady of the manor, of all things." He pointed to a portrait on the wall of a woman, and I froze at once when I saw the picture, as I recognised her as our mystery visitor. I could hardly believe it. I'd actually seen her ghost. For someone who'd never believed in the paranormal, it completely shifted my perception of reality quite considerably. "She does look a lot like Elizabeth Taylor in her heyday, does she not?" said the gentleman in concierge. "People report the smell of violets when she's around. She was the wife of the original owner of the mansion. She would host hundreds of parties here in former happier days," he said. "They say she haunts the hotel looking for her son." "What happened to her son?" I asked curiously. "Well, I gather he died at the age of 10 from scarlet fever, and the poor woman never came to terms with his tragic death. They said that even after her boy died, she almost lost her mind. She was so torn apart with grief and despair, and simply refused to believe he was actually dead. She would go around the mansion searching for him, calling him out, all day and night looking for him. I gather her husband would tell her that her son was dead, but she simply refused to believe him. It would seem the poor woman had no peace, even in death, as she keeps looking for her son." "That's so sad," I said. "Do you have a photograph of her son by any chance?" "I do, as it happens," he said, presenting me with a photograph of a young boy that literally looked identical to Stefan. I was astonished. "Is this a joke?" I asked, looking at the photograph in absolute disbelief. "That was her son, madam. It isn't a joke." I was stumped because the child in the photograph could have been a double for Stefan, and suddenly everything began to make sense, and explained why the woman had actually visited Stefan during the night. She thought he was her son. In that moment I actually felt remarkably sorry for her, roaming around this large mansion, searching for her son, even in death. As you can imagine, I told Stefan not to tell his mother about the ghost we'd seen, because I promise you we would have been forced to stay in that hotel for another night, just because Millie would have wanted to see the ghost for herself, and I'm quite sure she would have visited Stefan during the night. "Remind me never to stay at a so-called haunted hotel," said Millie. "I think they just say it's haunted just to get extra bookings. No wonder the porter was so indifferent and cagey. He possibly spun us a yarn to get us to believe in a fictitious ghost." Stefan and I exchanged secret glances, for we knew indeed that this hotel was haunted. My next outlandish story happened an entire year later, and that was when the Fisher family went to stay in a large wooden cabin in Alberta, in the Banff area, which is located in Alberta's Rocky Mountains and encompasses majestic mountains, imposing glaciers, ice fields, exquisite turquoise lakes, rivers, scenic valleys, peaks, flowery meadows, dense dreamy coniferous forests, and breathtakingly beautiful alpine landscapes. The opulent wooden cabin where we stayed at Banff was very sizable indeed, with 2 floors with their own balconies, rather reminding me of a grandiose Swiss chalet, as the polished cedar wood just gleamed and sparkled, and there were huge marble fireplaces in every living area in the house, with phenomenal artworks on the walls and bookshelves simply bursting with books. There were cosy, lavish furnishings and the most comfortable beds that I've ever slept in, swathed in the finest Egyptian cottons. It was clear that no expense had been spared, but I would not have expected anything less from Millie, because she always enjoyed wallowing in the lap of luxury and enjoying the finer things in life whenever possible. The cabin was literally overlooking the most breathtaking, beautiful scenic views on the lake, fringed by tall, statuesque mountains and dense, dreamy alpine forests, consisting of lodgepole pines and spruce trees that were reflected upon its gleaming silvery surface like a shimmering mirror. I could not have even imagined staying in a more exquisite place than this. After a day or so, I was left to mind the children for a few days, as Millie and her husband had decided to go on a 4-day mountainous hike, which involved some exciting camping opportunities that they wanted to enjoy. "We won't be gone for long, Zelda," she said. "Just keep an eye on the kids and don't let them get up to too much mischief." Every day I made sure the children had lots of fun, but I did permit them to go exploring in the woods as long as they didn't stray too far from the cabin. Imagine my surprise when Stefan told me that he'd seen a monkey man in the woods that they'd both been chasing. Based on their description of the critter, I really thought they were talking about a bear, and I nearly lost it with them. I was so cross. "You can't go chasing after bears," I chastised them. "Those creatures can kill humans. What on earth are you thinking?" "No, silly," said Gunther. "I know what a bear is. This was a monkey man. It wasn't a bear." "Whatever," I said. "Don't go chasing monkey men or bears. Do you understand?" But my words must have fallen on deaf ears, because the next day all the kids could talk about was the monkey man. I became increasingly alarmed, because I began to wonder if a man in a monkey suit was grooming the kids. For what I could ascertain, they had chased the monkey man through the woods and somehow managed to befriend him. How that had happened I couldn't imagine, but the thought made me sick to my stomach, and I could literally taste the nausea rising up in the back of my throat. I was responsible for these kids. If anything bad happened to them, Millie would almost certainly never ever forgive me. We played hide and seek together, Stefan told me, and we went swimming in the river. Monkey man is very nice. "Don't go anywhere near the man," I warned them. "You don't know what his intentions are. He might be intending to abduct you. You hear stories about weirdos like that all the time. You need to be careful of strangers. You can't just trust anyone." The next morning, as the kids went out into the woods to play, I guessed they were going to find the monkey man. I could tell they were enamoured and fixated by this man, as I noticed the way that their eyes lighted up when they talked about him. That really was a warning sign to me. I assumed that this insidious, duplicitous man was guilefully winning them over as a roue of some kind, and that was very troubling and disconcerting for me. I knew Stefan and Gunther well enough by now to know that they were mischievous most of the time, and not listening to the adults literally went with the territory as far as they were concerned. As young boys, they were naive, vulnerable, and easily misled. I decided I would have words with this nefarious man and tell him to leave the kids alone, or I'd actually call the police. As I walked through the wooded area, I could hear Stefan and Gunther's raised, jubilant voices, and I also heard loud, delighted screams, laughter, cries of delight, whooping sounds, and water splashing, and I realised that they were swimming in the lake. I walked up the hilly incline, and I could see the silhouette of a large figure staring out at the water and watching the children with bent knees through a curtain of shrubbery, with a large, muscular back facing me. My first alarmed thoughts was that this was the shady character that was stalking and spying on the kids. The figure was too hazy for me to see clearly close up, but based on what I could see, the man seemed to be wearing a monkey costume. "Excuse me, sir," I said, walking up to him. The head swivelled around to face me like an owl, and as the head turned, so did the shoulders with it. I realised then that I was not staring at a man, but a colossal ape-like humanoid that was evidently a woman, for she had breasts. I do not know who was more surprised, me or her. I had clearly startled her, for her dismayed large yellow eyes almost looked frightened. I had clearly caught her off guard, and she was not comfortable or at ease with my presence. I remember thinking, why are you frightened of me? I'm the one that should be frightened of you. It would be nothing for you to lash out at me, and I would be dead. Was this creature not even aware of how lofty, majestic, and powerful she was, I wondered. It's hard to give you a sense of perspective as to how enormous this critter was, but she was most certainly Herculean in size. It was a long time ago, so to ascertain how big she was is difficult, so I can only give you estimates. I think she might have been between 7 to 8 foot tall and 600 pounds, and covered in long dark hair, with some blonde highlights in the mix. I do remember that her legs were short and muscular, and her arms exceedingly long. The upper torso, especially the shoulder area, was exceedingly well defined, with pronounced muscle definition, and the head was shaped like a cone, with a little point at the very top, and it seemed to just flow seamlessly into the shoulders. I recall the face was long and feminine, with a skin a dark brown colour, with a defined brow ridge and a very wide but flat nose, with deep-set yellow eyes. I want to tell you that if this critter had not been terrified of me, I think my own fear would have been off the charts. Imagine for a moment standing in the presence of a critter like King Kong. It was like that as far as I was concerned. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was in the presence of an apex predator that demanded respect. Yet the critter's evident fear of me enabled me to let go of all my inhibitions and anxiety, because she wanted to get away from me as fast as she could. I watched her glance at me one more time with very troubled, concerned eyes, and then she vanished from my sight, moving like the wind as she darted away. I pulled the veil of verdant lacy shrubbery right back that overlooked the silvery lake, and that was when I saw Stefan and Gunther splashing around joyfully in the water with a smaller critter that looked like the one I'd encountered moments earlier. That was when I realised that I'd seen the mother watching her youngling playing with human children with a degree of trepidation. I noted that Stefan and Gunther were playing with this little critter as if he was just another kid. It seemed like they were getting along with the humanoid critter famously, and he seemed benign, benevolent, and congenial. It was hard to believe the critter had even been reticent or shy, because in truth he seemed more gregarious and outgoing than the kids themselves. I could see they were throwing Stefan's ball to each other and playing one of those water games, and the strange little critter, who was the splitting image of his mother, kept making these loud, chirpy, whooping sounds. I walked away from the river, feeling confident that the kids were safe and that the hairy humanoid critter that was remarkably human in appearance was warm-hearted and no threat to them. So I allowed the kids to play with the critter, which they did every single day until we left Banff. I naturally advised the kids not to tell their parents about the monkey man they had encountered, and I'm delighted to say they didn't say a thing, but were utterly devastated to say goodbye to their hairy friend, whom they'd grown to love. Stefan gave the critter his ball, and Gunther gave him a box of Lego blocks, and the critter gave them both each a pretty river stone that they still possess all these years later. "I don't want to leave my friend," cried Stefan. "He's different to my friends at home." "In what way?" I asked. "Well, he's so real," said Stefan, "so genuine." After I discovered what the critter was that Stefan and Gunther encountered on their trip to Alberta, I asked them if I could share their account with you, in this anonymous forum, of course, and they were willing to let me share their story. This is what Stefan remembers about the critter. "I gather the critter I encountered as a young boy was called Bigfoot. Recently I've been reading all kinds of mixed reviews on these creatures. The one I encountered had a heart of gold. I think he was similar in age to both of us, and about 5 foot tall at the time. I never regarded him as an animal ever, but as a human with long hair. Even though he didn't speak our language, that in no way impeded our friendship. While we were staying at the cabin in Alberta, we played with him almost every single day. On the first occasion we saw him, we actually chased after him, and he appeared reticent and desperately shy. He then became inquisitive about us, and we started to throw a ball at him, and the rest is history. That critter, or hairy human, was one of the most genuine friends I've ever had, even if it was only over just a few days that we got to know him. I will never forget him." This is Gunther's account. "Yes, I remember the Bigfoot very well. We called him Monkey Man, because although very human-like, he did have a look of a monkey about him. After the Bigfoot overcame his desperate shyness towards us, he was the most comical, gregarious critter, and he made us both laugh. He did like to mimic us a lot, which was hilariously funny. After a while, I barely noticed our physical differences. He was just like another kid to me, although different to my friends at home. He did not speak German, of course, but the language issue was never a problem. I know I'll never forget our hairy friend. I often wonder if he's still out there and if he remembers us at all. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, that was a fabulous story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.